Imagine this, you're home alone. It's almost midnight, and the silence feels heavier than it should. You grab the remote, maybe to distract yourself, maybe to stop your mind from wandering too far. But when you change the channel, something strange happens. The screen goes completely black for a moment. A broken static sound cuts through the room, like someone trying to speak through interference. And then a broadcast appears, one you are absolutely sure you've never seen before. Channel 13. No logo, no intro, nothing. Just a fixed, shaky camera, pointed at the corner of a dimly lit hallway. A clock on the wall, stuck at 0000, frozen in time. And deep in the shadows, there seems to be someone standing there, or something. You switch channels. Nothing changes. You switch back. The broadcast is still playing. The figure is still there. And that feeling, that cold, heavy feeling that this shouldn't exist, only gets worse. This is the story for tonight. A case once dismissed as an urban legend, later sealed as classified material, and eventually forgotten, at least by those who could forget, because the people who witnessed it, the ones who saw what they can't explain, they never forgot. This is the kind of story that leaves a mark even after it's over, the kind that should never be told, but somehow always finds its way back. Tonight, we dive into what became known as the midnight broadcast of Channel 13, a transmission that never appeared on any TV guide, was never logged by any provider, and should never, under any circumstance, have gone on air. If you think you've seen strange videos online, haunted recordings, lost tapes, get ready. This is different. This was found on tape, on several tapes, and they all show the same thing, midnight, Channel 13. A broadcast that didn't just call those who watched, but those who answered. The story begins long before the recording became a myth, long before the tapes circulated in obscure forums, and before anyone thought to call it the midnight broadcast. In truth, it all started with a disappearance. A simple disappearance, logged like so many others, and filed away with the usual cold bureaucracy. His name was Ethan Crowell, 22 years old, journalism student, living alone in a small studio apartment in the suburbs. Nothing remarkable. Average grades, almost non-existent social life, a temporary job at a video rental store that closed shortly after. But there was something about him that would always stand out in later testimonies. Ethan was too curious. The kind of person who never left a question unanswered. The kind who poked around places he shouldn't. The last time anyone spoke to him was on a Friday night. A friend described his voice as strange, tense, breathless. He said only one sentence before the call cut off. "Do you see it too? Channel 13, midnight, they're here." The friend thought it was a joke. But when Ethan didn't show up for work the next day and stopped answering calls altogether, concern turned into a missing person report. Then the police stepped in, without much effort, without urgency, treating it like just another adult who had probably decided to disappear on his own. His apartment looked normal at first glance. No signs of forced entry, nothing broken, nothing out of place. Except for one thing. On the living room floor, beside the TV, there was a black VHS tape. No label, no markings. Just a single number written in faded ink, 13. The investigator assigned to the case, Daniel Rourke, wrote in his report that he assumed it was a useless relic, something Ethan probably used to record old TV programs. He didn't even bother to check if there was anything recorded on it, but he should have. Rourke would only watch the tape years later, and when he finally did, he never slept well again, because the recording showed exactly what Ethan described in his final call, and much more. The tape began with static, just regular TV static, but then, slowly, the image stabilized into a narrow corridor, lit by an extremely bright white ceiling light that almost blew out the edges of the screen. The camera seemed to be mounted on an improvised tripod, slightly tilted to the left. There was no audio track, no narration, no sign of editing. It was raw, almost primitive. But the most disturbing part wasn't the corridor. It was what stood in the background, a figure, motionless, completely still. Its body was far too thin, as if it were dried out from the inside. The head was slightly tilted downward, as though looking at the floor. The face was impossible to see, the shadows swallowed it completely. And then, just as many witnesses would later report, something happened at specific time marks. 0:30, the digital clock on the wall flickered. The figure slowly lifted its head. The image began to distort, as if the recording were fighting against a signal that wasn't supposed to be there. And then a whisper emerged, barely audible, as if someone were trying to speak through the tape itself. It was this recording that started everything, and it was this recording that, for some unknown reason, never disappeared. Because Ethan disappeared. But the tape remained. Daniel Rourke had never been the kind of officer who took work home. After nearly 2 decades dealing with disappearances, domestic disputes, and small crimes that rarely reached a satisfying conclusion, he had learned to shield himself emotionally. But the case of Ethan Crowell, that one never left his mind. Not because of what he saw, but because of what he didn't see. There was something far too strange in the friend's testimony. Something unsettling in the perfectly tidy apartment. Something too quiet about that VHS tape he didn't bother to watch at the time. And then, years later, when his career was nearing its end, the tape resurfaced. Not because it had been lost, but because someone sent it back, directly to his home. The brown envelope arrived with no return address, just his name written in shaky handwriting, as if the person who wrote it had a hand that was either too cold or too frightened. Inside, there was only one thing. The tape marked 13. Except now, there was another marking, a symbol drawn in fresh ink, almost as if it had been added just minutes before the envelope was sent. An irregular circle crossed by 3 vertical lines. Rourke had never seen that symbol before, but for some reason, just looking at it, stirred something uncomfortable inside him. A chill that began at the base of his neck and ran down his spine. That day, sitting on his couch, the dim light of the living room reflecting off the tape's worn surface, Rourke made the decision that would change everything. He would watch the recording. He hooked up his old VCR, took a deep breath, and pressed play. The same static appeared, the same slow transition into the narrow corridor, the same bright white light nearly blowing out the image. Everything exactly as described in the old report, exactly as he remembered. But there was something different this time. Something that hadn't been there before. The figure in the background, the thin, motionless silhouette with the face swallowed by shadow, was closer. Not by much. Maybe a step, maybe 2. But close enough that Rourke felt the impact instantly. Like his body recognized the danger before his mind did. He stopped the tape, rewound it, watched again. Same thing. The figure had moved forward. The digital clock on the wall displayed 00, blinking irregularly. That shouldn't have been possible. The recording wasn't live. Nothing should change. Nothing should move outside of what was originally captured. And yet, it changed. That's when Rourke noticed the second detail. The camera was shaking. Very slightly, almost imperceptibly. As if the equipment were resting on an unstable surface, or as if someone had bumped into it. "This wasn't like this," he muttered, his voice low as though afraid of attracting the attention of something that might be listening. He fast-forwarded a few seconds. More interference, another distortion, the figure even closer. And for the first time, something of the face seemed visible. Not details, not clear features, but the outlines. A jawline far too thin, eyes sunken too deep, a forehead leaning forward like someone getting too close to the lens. Rourke stopped the tape a third time. He was sweating. The air in the room felt heavy, as if the temperature had dropped suddenly. But he needed to understand. He pressed play again, and then he heard it. The same whisper others had reported, almost inaudible, but present. An irregular murmur, as if the tape were trying to reproduce a voice that shouldn't exist. Rourke leaned closer to the TV and raised the volume. The louder it got, the louder the static became, creating an irritating buzz. But amid the distortion, he managed to make out a phrase that made his blood run cold. "He saw me first." Rourke shut everything off at once. He stood in absolute silence. He barely breathed. Because at that moment, he realized something he had never considered. The tape had never been recorded by Ethan. It was showing him the figure that moved closer with each playback. the figure staring into the camera, as if aware of the viewer. The figure whispering words, as if it had consciousness of who was watching. It was reacting to whoever watched the tape. And if it was getting closer, then it wasn't just part of the recording. It wasn't just a cursed video or a ghost signal. It was something trying to cross over. Rourke stood up slowly, as if afraid to disturb the air around him. It was something trying to cross over, then toward his hallway. For a second, just 1 second, he had the feeling he was no longer alone. And then, in that heavy silence, something happened. The kitchen clock changed to 000, just for an instant, and then it returned to normal. Rourke knew right then that he could no longer ignore the case. He could no longer pretend Ethan Crowell had been just another missing person. The tape was alive. The case was open, and he had no choice. He had to find out where the midnight broadcast signal came from. He had to find out what happened to Ethan, and above all, he had to find out who, or what, was on the other side of the camera.